to be following the link as and when they get it. Anybody that doesn't come along because of the link, we'll make sure that they get a recording of this meeting so that we don't miss out on any of that. But thank you so much for kind of persevering and attending today. It's really good to see you all. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you should see that. And when I am in screen sharing mode, it makes it really difficult to see people in the room if you have any questions and things like that. So if you do have any questions as we're going along, please shout out just so that I don't overlook any hands up in the background, if that's okay.
I'll try and keep an eye on that as well, Helen, if people are being polite and waiting.
Great, thank you, Jade. I don't want to kind of overlook anything that's pertinent as we're going along. So thank you everybody for coming along. We'll see how the room goes and whether we get more people come along, but we will share the recording because there's some really interesting things that are coming through in this session, and hopefully it will be of use to you, and we'll get some good dialogue going as we go along. This is the second meeting of our Warts Knox partnership, and just as a bit of an overview and a reminder, this is a collaboration, so it's about people and organisations across the city and county areas coming together to share best practice, to share learning, to make new links, and to ultimately all kind of come together and help more people walk more frequently across our region. So that's just kind of a bit of an overview. I'm sure you're familiar with. We've had lots of conversations outside of these meetings too. And we're already starting to see the benefits of some of that collaboration, which is really good. Okay, here's our agenda for today. So we're going to do a quick welcome and introduction. We'll do a very brief overview and reflection of the themes that came out of the last session. So anybody that might not have picked up on the things that have come out and been circulated, and we'll just cover that ground too. We'll have a discussion around maximising walking programmes. So what's working well, how can we share best practice, how can we learn from each other, those types of conversations. Edwina is here from the Active Partners Trust, and she'll be talking to us about funding opportunities for walking programmes. And then we'll have a quick conversation and some discussion around co-design, and we've brought in some examples of really unique best practice to share with you that might be useful, and then a quick roundup. So hopefully that sounds like what you're expecting to see. At any point, just shout out and let me know if you've got any questions, and we can happily sort of be quite flexible with the way that the conversation goes. Okay, so we'll move to introductions. When we met last time, there was quite a lot of people in the room, and one of the things that we were really mindful of is that we didn't really have the opportunity to kind of introduce each other because of the volumes. And we also came out of that session sort of feeling that actually there was probably some really, really good links that could be made across the attendees. So what we're going to do this time is just do a very quick introduction. I can't see, Adam, how many people are in the room at the moment. Can you? Broadly.
10. We have that.
10. Okay.
Another one now is just joining.
Okay, so if we split into two breakout rooms, and so we'll split you into two breakout rooms. It will be completely randomly selected, and if you could each just take 2 minutes to give the group a really quick overview of who you are, the area in relating to walking that you're involved in, and anything really new and pertinent that people might have. It's going to have to be really, really quick and to the point. 2 minutes each, and we'd love at the end of that if there are any links that you would like to make with other partners that are in the room. So we felt that the last session that there was a lot of new faces to each other, and at the end of it there was potentially loads of links that we could make. So this is just a very quick introduction to see how we might be able to link up with some of the people that we are maybe meeting for the first time properly to discuss walking. So Adam, if you had a good chat there with the people that were in your group. Our group was a small one, but actually we came out of it with some really useful links to follow up with. And just that kind of 5 minutes was really worthwhile, that connection. So hopefully you felt that the same thing had happened in your groups too. Okay, I'm going to, we'll move on in the agenda then. the next item really is just looking at a very quick overview of the things that we discussed at the last session. So I don't know whether you remember, the last session took place a couple of months ago, and we talked broadly about all sorts of topics that were really kind of affecting the partners in the room, and just to kind of review the things that and refresh really the things that came out of that conversation. We took all of those notes from those discussions and from that input and put them into themes. There were some really clear themes that came out of that discussion, and they're on your screen right now. So hopefully these will resonate and still be pertinent to everybody. But some of the key things that came out of those conversations about what's big in your kind of space at the moment, what really is kind of focusing attention. It was things like understanding the barriers to walking. It was infrastructure and enabling walking. It was placemaking and how we make people feel that the spaces that they're in are the ones that they want to move around and engage in. We talked about 20-minute neighbourhoods and that kind of close proximity, and utility walking especially came out of that conversation. And then lots of conversations about well-being, health and the environment, being more active more often, and accessibility. And if anything that came out of that, looking at the scale of the conversation, was how walking is really being tackled from so many different angles right now. So from sports teams through to environmental teams and through to transport infrastructure and accessibility. It really is kind of very broad, and seeing them kind of chunked into those themes, I think is has been quite helpful for me at least. So it was just really to do that very brief review of the things that came out of the last meeting in terms of what really is kind of driving the conversations to walking at the moment. Okay. We are going to move into our first kind of discussion session then. And hopefully, I think that there'll be enough in the room to be able to kind of keep everybody all here in one place. If you want to kind of add to the conversation, please just kind of chip in. But what we wanted to have was a quick conversation about walking programs in your areas, and how we create programs that are engaging and authentic, and to share some of that knowledge and some of that experience that's within the room. So the question really that I'm going to pose to the group is how we create walking programs that get people walking more often in their everyday lives. And I've put a few discussion points in there as well so that we can kind of move through those and hopefully get to some really kind of clear and concise sort of outcomes around what is working well and what isn't working well, and what you see in your areas that seems to be gaining traction. So we'll move on to this without much ado. Oops, sorry. And I wonder really whether anybody has any sort of any examples that are happening in their areas where they think that it's gaining some really good traction, or whether the results are moving well. And it's really open to discussion, really. Ooh.
I'm not volunteering, Helen. I was just going to pose, I guess, in terms of that walking programs, I guess thinking about it in its broadest sense. So it might not be led walks, but it might be how do we enable walking communities. So yeah, so that could be anything from active travel to people leaving their house with a befriend or anything like that. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from people if they've got some examples.
Yeah, that would be great.
Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just mentioned in the other group, I'm just starting out with the wellbeing walks at Edwinstone Sherwood Forest. But starting off by linking with the My Nottinghamshire group, and just doing things with them as a group to start with, and then introducing the walking, and that sort of helped to set up there already. And we have a mind volunteer on every sort of wellbeing walk we do. So anyone with mental health issues, they can talk to them. So we've just done it with Mind at the moment, but we're opening it up towards the end of June to anyone. But linking with local groups in the community, I think, is good. I've also linked with a friendship group recently, so they're coming to do a very short walk around the cricket pitch because they're not as mobile. But some of them may be able to move on to that wellbeing walk. So it's linking up to those local community groups for me that I think will work well for us. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Carol. Do you find then that those groups are already established? Are they? They already have some relationships between the attendees?
They're already established, and we've sort of made the link locally, and I've gone into a session and talked to them about the walks and done other things with them as well. And then they sort of come along to the walk. So it's making that like partnership and being a friendly face that
Yeah,
it inspiring them to do it basically.
that sounds great. And I guess in that instance as well, the focus is not just about walking, isn't it? I think that's one of the things that makes it quite difficult
Yeah.
to access walking. People don't always just kind of think, oh, I want to get out there and walk. They think maybe I want to build friendship groups or I want to feel better.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's what the walk that we're doing is about. We're calling it walk and talk, and it's very, very slow. We walk from the visitor centre to the major oak tree and back, and and then we have a sit down at the major oak tree for 10 to 15 minutes. So, for someone walking at a normal pace, it would take maybe half an hour, but it's taking us an hour. So we're taking it very slowly. We have someone with a mobility scooter, someone that uses a walking aid. So we've made it accessible for
brilliant.
people as well. But they don't realise probably how far they're walking because they are talking all the time, and that's the emphasis of it, is talking and listening.
Yeah, and I think that's really key, that they're getting so much out of it that's on top of the walking. Nor, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just kind of following on from what was just being said, really, because in Lincolnshire, I am working with a project with Age UK. So they just were awarded at the end of last year, they got some funding to create a new walking project for older people. So they've got something called Sapphire Strolls, and it's for people that are over 50. So you get quite a big range of people that come along, but the idea is that it's trying to encourage people who don't normally walk, so like this project. And the way that they work, something that they do really well is, again, it's not just about the walking, it's about improving or reducing feelings of social isolation. So they have a quite a social aspect to the walk, where they'll visit lots of different parks in the area, but they'll make sure that each one has a cafe and facilities in it as well, so that there is time to kind of regroup at the end of the walk, and they can kind of reflect on the session and have a chat and just get together, really. And it's all kept quite casual, so it's not just a case of they walk and then they dissipate again. So that's something that works really well and gets people to kind of keep coming back and signing up. And I think they do also have, so they've got a couple of volunteers per session. But yes, so they do try and aim to make sure the walks are accessible as possible along the route, so people with mobility scooters can come along. But yeah, I think that the social element is a really important aspect of that.
And I really love the naming of that as well, because it's quite
Yeah,
inclusive, isn't it? It's not a 50 over 50s walk, or it's quite
exactly.
inclusive. A sapphire walk. It sounds like it can be for anyone, and even
Exactly.
just kind of that very at that very basic level. Sometimes the way that we refer to these programs kind of infers a certain user group, a certain beneficiary group. So it's nice to see them called something different as well. That sounds great. Um, Catherine, I think you're. Oh no, but Catherine was in the room. I don't know whether she's still in the room now. I
I'm
can't
still
see her.
here.
Oh, Catherine, there you go. I wondered. I'm sorry to kind of pluck you out of the audience, but Catherine, I just wondered whether there's any because so from your perspective with British Nordic walking. Nordic walking seems to be something that's hitting a bit of a renaissance, and there seems to be quite a bit of focus on that. Is there any sort of traction, or is there any increased engagement in Nordic walking that you're seeing across the city and counties?
Do you want me to talk just about Nottinghamshire or wider in the UK?
Nottinghamshire, but wider as well. I think it would just be useful if there is
Yeah,
good best practice.
yeah. So because we have some sort of activity locally that's promising. That we have in Ashfield, we have an instructor who's been involved in the social prescribing, and we had an instructor at Wilson Park on the same project. But that was just a trial, and that's come to an end. So we're quite keen to sort of see how we could develop that. But looking at across the rest of the country, like we've trained 12 instructors in Greater Manchester, who all the instructors are breast cancer patients, and they're working with breast cancer patients. So that's just starting, and that working with a charity, ABC Diagnosis. That has such potential because the benefits of Nordic walking on the lymphatic system, helping with the symptoms that often women have after they've had surgery. So those kind of medical projects we're quite interested to develop. They can work well. It depends on how keen medical professionals are to refer through to external instructors, because we've been working with amputees as well. As an amputee and a physio assistant who are trained in Nottingham, but they struggle to get the medical people to refer to them. So it's a bit hit and miss looking at that social prescribing aspect. But there's quite a lot of councils around the country have trained volunteers to be Nordic walking instructors, and they have them running as part of their walking for health walking projects. I mean, some of them are under the Ramblers umbrella and some have gone independent. And they fit in well because the Nordic walking can make it more interesting for people just to learn something new. Yeah, kind of boost of self-esteem there, can make it less painful. People whose joints are aching, and it just makes it a bit more special, because for some people Nordic walking, ordinary walking is seen as kind of low status. It's not something that's pleasurable, even though we all love it ourselves. So there's quite a few other projects happening in other areas of the country, and I'd love to replicate them in Nottinghamshire. We've got a lot of work working with ethnic minorities in Bristol. I would love to recreate that project model in Nottinghamshire.
That's so interesting, Catherine. I think that's really, I mean, there's so many things that are in there. The breast cancer patients kind of then becoming Nordic walk leaders is a remarkable thing. And I think when we talk later about, we're going to briefly have some conversation about co-design, that idea that people with lived experience are coming together and building something that works for them. In a lot of ways, it sounds like walking is going to create its own community. It's almost like a catalyst to create a community. And then there's so many benefits from that. That's actually really, really, really interesting, I think. And likewise with the ethnic minority groups. I know when Jade presented in this session last time, we looked over the data that showed kind of people who were really struggling to engage. They're on the fringes of very low levels of physical activity, and being able to engage with some of those in something that then develops pride and develops its own community and becomes sustainable, that would be a remarkable win, I think, to be able to kind of put that type of things together, really inclusive. Yeah.
In fact, what was interesting yesterday, I just happened to interact with a guy who leads the South Asian group in Rochdale, and he said they did a survey of the barriers to exercise for South Asian people. And the number one reason was fear of dogs.
Oh, really?
And I told him, well, we teach people how to defend yourself using the poles. And so he's really interested in Nordic walking now just because of the dog issue, which is interesting, isn't it?
That's really interesting. And I think it really kind of focuses on that very people level, doesn't it? You know, if there is a barrier, then whatever that barrier is, it's very real to you. And fear of dogs is a very real barrier. I know it's not quite the same thing, but at Ridewires we're doing some 10-week programs with South Asian women, and one of our biggest barriers there is language. And the shared language and difficulties that language barrier presents. And we're producing some laminated cards that help to describe and explain, as multilingual options on, but also as real visual things in as well. Because for us in that group, that kind of language barrier is a real difficulty that we need to get over. Interesting. Anybody else got any other kind of things? I'm really also interested in hearing the barriers as well, because we're talking about sort of successes, but obviously we know that engaging people in walking is really very difficult, and people that typically would benefit kind of almost the most from walking are also quite often those that are on the fringes of physical activity and with low levels of activity and potentially low levels of engagement in their community as well. Is there any barriers that you feel that are cropping up consistently that are creating difficulties in delivering these types of sustainable programs? Volunteers, for example, or even communication channels. Murat, with your Stapleford program, you're leading a program of walking activities for people with overlapping deprivations, aren't you, and low levels of physical activity. The engagement on that's been quite difficult, would you say?
The Stapleford project has been, I think I was just going to say, I think one of the barriers, it's not really a barrier because it's very specific, is actual funding, because that particular project is very much to do with an estate in Stapleford of about, I don't know how many people it includes, but it's about 20 streets, so say 1,000 people or 1,500 people, I don't know. And the thing about it is promoting to that group and only that group is impossible, with the likes of social media. And so you have to broaden it to, if you like, the whole of Stapleford, even though you can't use the outputs. You can use it as sort of added benefits to the local area, but it isn't easy because they're a hard to reach group, and they're sort of like in the, I think is it the 10th percentile of deprivation? I think it is. So yeah, by the very nature, and I think what's really difficult is, aside from a fantastic counsellor that's really integrated and very supportive and always wants to do stuff for that particular area, that particular estate and surrounding area, it hasn't been very easy to communicate with the local borough council and housing officers and just potential people that would have access. Even the social prescribers, there's quite a high turnover. So I've had conversations, they've left, I'm having new conversations. So there's to try and get to the people who would communicate to those people particularly hasn't been easy. But having said that, the group itself is growing, and the Facebook page that they set up themselves is growing. We've got 2 walk leaders out of that from that group. So that, there's quite a good number of successes, and there's normally between 5 and 10 people. 3 or 4 of them tend to be from the target group, so we can use as outputs, and the rest of them obviously just really enjoy the walk. So it is lovely because so many people are getting benefits, and we've got lots of really good feedback and photos and maps of where they've been and everything. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag really, but it is, I mean, we've only been going a year, and I think the legacy, if it comes to that, is that it will carry on once the funding stops. But I think the funding can be a bit of an issue sometimes, because you've got to be really strict, or within reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And funding is something that I think probably affects all of us. Funding, monitoring, securing that funding, longevity of the funding. There's a whole issue there, isn't there, around kind of moving to walking being a long-term change, but funding quite often being a short-term fix, and they don't always kind of match up together. Edwina, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I thought I'd just come in at this point because I'm not going to be covering it in a minute, because it's not open at the moment. But there is a fund called the People's Health Trust, and that does work at a really local level. Now, the problem with that fund is that they don't pick up all the areas. So you might think that you're in a deprived area that would be a priority area to them. So it won't necessarily cover the area, but it certainly would be worth looking at that towards. It usually opens sort of in the autumn time, and I'll publicise it in the funding newsletter. So definitely have a look at that fund when that opens up. Now that runs for 2 years and potentially is up to £40,000 over those 2 years. So substantial amount of money. So want to look for maybe at that time.
Definitely. Murat, I think you probably.
I was just going to say, Edwina, yeah, that's who we're using at the moment for that
Okay.
particular for
It
that
is,
one in
yeah.
Stapleford.
Oh,
Yeah. But
So
actually, it's
Okay.
really worth flagging up the People's Health Trust to anybody in the room that is looking for that type of funder. At Ridewise, we have loads and loads of different funders, and they've been so unique in the fact that they're not pushing us for large numbers. They're pushing us for genuine engagement. So the numbers of that, because sometimes, especially kind of when you stacked up against cycling projects and mass participation projects, kind of that engaging at a very community level, it doesn't stack up if you're just looking at numbers, if you're looking at nothing else but numbers. And the People's Health Trust genuinely do seem to be focused on true transitional change. So our outputs for this are very, very low compared to what we would normally see. And it really is I mean, Marat, it is literally door-to-door support, isn't it? That we're able to provide at a street level. So we literally have a list of streets we can support, and we can go out and knock on those doors and talk to people and become a face in their community. And that costs money to be able to deliver, but the People's Health Trust seem to entirely understand that, and are really embedded and engaged in that genuine change. So it's really one to look out for. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it doesn't provide the solution ongoing, but maybe yeah, link up and I'll sort of have a search and see if there's any others. But yeah, sorry, that wasn't a solution there.
So wrapping that up, if I can just kind of summarize what I think we've talked about, it seems like there's some really unique and exciting examples actually that are happening across our areas. Carol's example was brilliant of that group that are coming together. Catherine's example, and likewise Nor's, and that idea, I think, and what's consistent across them is that the projects that are working well with true engagement from the communities. It sounds like that people are engaging with people that they identify with, that they've got lived experience of, and it becomes authentic rather than kind of rolling out a weekly standard walk program. This is about people, and that seems quite consistent across all the things that people have mentioned, which is great. Okay, well, we'll summarize that in the notes when it comes out of it, but I'm going to move us on to the next section, which is handing over to Edwina. Edwina, I will let you introduce yourself if you don't mind, and Edwina's going to talk us about funding opportunities for walking projects.
Yes, yeah. I'm from Active Partners Trust, so I'm the funding lead for Active Partners Trust. I cover Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. I've got some slides. Now, this is where I'm terrible with kind of, even though 3 years into using Teams, I'm still rubbish at sharing things, but I shall attempt that if I can, so just bear with me.
I'll have them handy as a backup if it doesn't work, Edwina.
Because what tends to happen is I share them fine, but then I can't see them myself. So it's a view thing. So I'll see if I can do it. Can you, because that's come up on my screen. Can you see that okay? And if
Absolutely.
so, right. And yeah, so this is where it might go horribly wrong now, just because they're like little sort of pin pricks for me. So focus on content. That might, oh yes, I can see them. So yeah, you can tell I'm not great at this. Yeah, so I thought I'd look at these funding opportunities. Hopefully you can see on screen that I've got Sport England, Awards for All, the Nottinghamshire County Council Fund and JN Derbyshire Foundation. Can you all see that? Deathly silence. Oh yeah, brilliant.
Definitely.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, thank you. Phew. Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah. So what I thought I'd do when I was preparing this presentation, what I thought I'd do is instead of just sort of like telling you about funding opportunities, which may or may not cover walking, I'd actually look on the systems and see what projects have been funded in the past, so focusing on walking, and see what came up. And fortunately, Sport England and Awards for All came up. There isn't the data really for Nottinghamshire County Council's fund, but I still think that's one to look at. And again, for JN Derbyshire, because of the outcomes, possibility, so plan Bs for those. So I've included those for sort of plan Bs, but we'll look at Sport England small grants first, and then go on to Awards for All and see what they've done in the past. So Sport England small grants comes with a little bit of a health warning, because actually it's closing the 30th of June. Now, this is the first time in like 10 years I've ever seen a kind of a closing date for this programme. So it's a little bit alarming to see a closing date, but it's been such a successful programme. I'm kind of hoping that what happens from the 1st of July will be some form of small grants moving forward. But obviously at this point in time, no guarantees. But given kind of that 10 years sort of legacy of this fund, I really do hope that this will continue. But we've still got a bit of a window of an opportunity with just a few more weeks. And in terms of the application form, it's relatively easy. So that in terms of the form, it's the usual sort of information that you would have on an application form, organisational details, etc. But they've reduced it down from when I started in this role, 10 years ago, from a five sort of questions with 500 words. They've reduced it right down to 2 sections. So it's relatively easy now with those 2 questions, those key questions. They're not asking for reams and reams from you. So I'll just basically go through the key facts about the funds. So clearly focus on sport and physical activity, which includes walking. Their real focus with this fund is on people that are less active. So people that are not doing any activity at all, or doing a small amount of activity and just sort of need nudging forward to do a bit more. Their primary focus, and this has been coming back in terms of applications that I've seen over the last sort of few months, is that they really, really want projects to focus on the 30% most deprived communities, and they want to see evidence of that. So not sort of vaguely referring to those communities, but really kind of convincing them that those are the communities that you're focusing on. In this current sort of form of the small grants programme, so it's kind of changed form a bit over the last couple of years or so. So a bit of a focus on the pandemic. When there was the Queen's Jubilee, it focused on the Jubilee at that time. Is that a question that's popped up?
I think it's just a general comment,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll carry on. So it did focus on the Jubilee as well. So they kind of had a few months ago, sort of back in the summer, looking at funding sort of like celebration events, that sort of thing. So it's kind of changed over the last 6 months or so, particularly. So the current focus has been on the King's coronation. So they've introduced a couple of other priorities for the fund. So one being around young people and one being around environmental sustainability. Now, they're quite vague about that environmental sustainability. So they talk about introducing kind of like environmental things into your project, but quite vague about that. But those 2 new priorities for this fund are really sort of reflecting kind of the King's kind of priorities in that he's had sort of as when he was Prince. So that's kind of where the fund is at the moment. So it changes, which makes me a little bit hopeful that from the 1st of July that they will still have this, but as I say, I don't know for sure, but it'll be in some different form. But I'm pretty sure that if and when they do sort of relaunch this, they will continue to look at the kind of the most deprived communities, because that's kind of what's flowing through their strategy. Grants potentially between £300 and up to £15,000. So I've got kind of up to £10,000 in there as well. So if you're applying, and you probably wouldn't need 15,000, but if you were applying for up to £15,000, you would need to comply with Sport England's code of governance. So they have a governance code in terms of how you constituted, etc. And they're looking for sort of tier 1 governance if you're bidding between £10,000 and £15,000. So that's kind of tip top in terms of your governance. But if you're not quite there with your governance and the governance code, you can apply up to £10,000. So they're a little bit more relaxed at that level. And it pretty well, as long as you've got a constitution, bank account, that sort of thing that's in the name of the organisation, you probably would fit that up to £10,000. They can fund a wide range of revenue costs. They also do fund minor capital improvements, but that any sort of revenue cost basically that can get your project from start to finish really up and running. The only thing that they do tend to be a little bit sticky about is where they're funding, or there's requests for funding for personal equipment that goes off with the kind of the individual and that's not retained by the group. So I had a request about this fund a few weeks ago from a group that was looking for walking boots. And I wasn't too sure because it's walking boots are obviously very specific to an individual. You mold them in, etc., and not particularly something that this group wanted to retain for various reasons. And I asked Built England whether there might be some flexibility in terms of walking boots, and they came back and said basically no. And it was for the group to kind of think what other costs it might need support with. So that was a little bit disappointing, because obviously for some people within the kind of the most deprived communities, the cost of walking boots might be quite a significant cost. So that, yeah, a little bit of a disappointing in terms of that response. Projects can run for up to 12 months. It was mentioned earlier today about co-production, and Sporting and really do like to see sort of that co-design, that co-production in terms of evidencing needs, so that people are actually wanting to do the walks, to do the activity. And yeah, there at the bottom, closing date 30th of June. So watch this space. I will be watching that space very, very closely, particularly as I've invested quite a bit of time in terms of putting some recordings together that explain this fund a bit more. So it goes into a bit more detail about the guidance, and then so basically an 8-minute video into the guidance, and then another video about 12 minutes long that just goes through the application form, relatively straightforward application form. Any questions before I move on? And I can send out the links to the videos. As I say, it's a very short window of opportunity. Oh yeah, before I move on, actually, as I say, I did this search to see what sort of projects Sport England had funded in the past, and this is just a screenshot. There was loads of them, so I just kind of focused on a few. So just give you a second or two to have a look at those. So there is a Nordic walking example in there, I think I put in, and some others. Just worth a look to see what they're funding. And you can see from that, actually, a couple of those are the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Activity Funds. That's actually the small grants. You know, they just renamed it temporarily to focus on that. And there's a couple of the small grants examples. So yeah, basically awards sort of £2,500 going up to just about £6,000 there. But there were quite a lot of examples, so that was very reassuring that walking is becoming sort of front and centre in terms of what they're supporting. They a few years ago they wouldn't look at walking applications.
That's really good to see, Edwina, to see that there's because the difficulty is stacking up against all the competition, isn't it, when it comes to grants and grant applications, and sometimes you can have a brilliant application, but actually it really depends on who you sat next to in terms of the assessment and what else has gone into the pot. So it's reassuring to see that we've got some traction on some of those walking projects locally.
Yeah, Jade, I'm not quite seeing the chat. So if there's things in the chat there that are questions, could somebody sort of shout them out to me?
I'll flag them up, Edwina. At the moment, people are just sharing information, but if there are any questions, I'll flag them up for you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so I mentioned and I can share this later. So there's the 8-minute video that just goes through the bit more detail about the fund, and then a 12-minute one. If you feel that the fund's right for you and you think you can get a bid in before the 30th of June, then there's the one that sort of goes through the application form. As I say, I'm hopeful that they will continue with a small grants programme, but at the moment, first time in 10 years where I've had this sort of uncertainty about this fund. But yeah, potential if it does carry on. So if there's no questions about the small grants programme, I'll move forward to awards for all. So when I did my search, it was also pleasing to see that awards for all had funded walking projects. Again, a bit of a health warning, but not quite as negative as the health warning for Sport England in terms of not really knowing what's happening after the 30th of June. The health warning is more to do with the data that's on the system that I was looking at in terms of awards that I've made. So some of the information, and I'll show you some projects just like I've done in terms of the small grants programme, where they've been successful in getting money. The data's a bit old, so it's more than a year old, and that's not because walking projects are not getting the funding. I'm sure that's not the case. They simply haven't posted their most recent data onto the system, so don't be alarmed that some of this data is a bit old when we get to look at it. So yeah, quick overview in terms of awards for all. So bit similar to Sport England, grants between £300 and £10,000 for up to 1 year of activity. They haven't got that higher threshold of £15,000, but they did make an announcement yesterday where they are actually looking to up that limit to £20,000. So I think that's in the autumn. So that, again, one to watch this space. So if you were doing lots of bits of work over the county, etc., that might be quite an interesting opportunity to look at later in the year if you need more than £10,000. Bit more flexible than Sport England Small Grants. So Sport England Small Grants is very much about new or additional activity, whereas Awards for All is more flexible in terms of that they will look at new, existing activity, and if you want to continue that because it's a success but you need funding for it, they will look at that kind of ongoing support moving on. So it doesn't have to be new activity for Awards for All. Priorities, they've got four key priorities. You don't have to meet all of these, you just need to meet one and meet one of the priorities convincingly. And I think probably the best one out of the 4 priorities is probably that one about bringing people together to build strong relationships in and across communities. But also maybe there's the 4th priority, something around people sort of facing challenges in terms of the cost of living crisis. So in terms of perhaps helping with transport costs to get people to where they need to be for walks, etc. There may be some overlap there. So from the examples that I've picked up on their system, clearly walking is something that has potential in terms of being funded. Open to a wide range of voluntary and community organisations. I didn't mention for Sport England, they also have got a wide range of organisations that they can fund. So it can be for both these organisations, can be kind of right through from statutory right through to your small community organisations. No deadline for this programme. Can take about 16 weeks to turn an application around, so fairly slow. So you need to plan ahead if bidding for this one. Didn't mention for the Sport England Small Grants, they are actually turning bids around really quickly for Sport England. So they say on their website about 3 weeks. I'm seeing from other people that are applying to the fund, it's actually taking maybe 3-4 weeks. I think they're seeing a surge of bids because of people being mindful of that closing date at the end of June. And again, co-production, really important. So your project should involve your community. So you do need to provide evidence of need that the community that you're wanting to work with has been involved in kind of the ideas behind the project. So here's some examples. Apologies about the dates. So we're looking at projects dating back to kind of January 2022. And as I say, that's not because I think that they're not funding walking projects. It's just that they've just not uploaded the information to the system. I expect that they'll probably upload that information in the next few weeks. So if I do spot anything, I can share that with the group because that might be interesting. So again, I'll just let you have a quick look at what came up.
Can I ask a question, Edwina, while people are just looking at that? It links to our next agenda item anyway, quite nicely. But in terms of evidencing that co-production, what is a kind of an acceptable way to evidence that? Is it kind of the outputs of conversations? Is it surveys? Is it just that you're engaged with your community and what are funders looking for?
I think it's all of that you've mentioned. The stronger that you've got it, the more convincing it is. So if you're getting volunteers from, for example, from the community and they're feeding back, they've got that voice from the community, that they're hearing that. But yes, from its very basic sort of level, surveys are great. But yes, the more the better, and the more that you reach out into the community, that's better. But just showing something that shows that you're not sort of plonking some walking activity in an area and just hoping that's going to happen. You've heard that there's some need. So I think it's what you can get really. Sometimes it's something from like Facebook local groups or whatever, getting sort of comments back from that, or whatever sources you've got you can get, but make sure that you share that within your application form, because they will be looking at that. And in the past Awards for All, they were quite transparent in their their scoring system. So they used to share a scoring sheet, and one of the sort of areas which used to get the highest score when they were going through the assessors were going through the sheet was evidencing that need. So yeah, quite important.
That's really
also,
helpful.
Yeah, also project design as well. So one of the things that I'm seeing in terms of Sport England bids that are being sort of rejected at the moment, and I've looked at the draft applications sort of after the event, is that the project design is not clear. So people have sort of like vaguely alluded to what they're doing, but I think the funders really like to feel reassured that the activity will happen. So by evidencing kind of how you're going to do that activity really in terms of start to finish in terms of your project design is something that funders are also liking to see, particularly Sport England at the moment, just to give them that reassurance that when you receive that funding, hopefully that you will hit the ground literally running with it.
Thank you.
So those I think are my kind of plan A's for groups, really. Your small grants, yep, let's see what happens in the next few weeks, fingers crossed, and awards for all. Plan B's, these are a couple of plan B's maybe, and there's sort of again a bit of a health warning with the Nottinghamshire County Council funding, because it's actually paused at the moment, but maybe one for the autumn. So just one to keep an eye on. Nice little fund, doesn't cover Nottingham City, it's just Nottinghamshire County, and there's a whole load of kind of priorities they've got for this fund at the bottom. Improving physical activity, physical health, improving mental health, reduce loneliness, etc. And as you work kind of up through those priorities, a lot of overlap in terms of kind of walking activity. So walking fits quite nicely with this fund. It's, as I say, it's closed at the moment. They're looking at it opening around sort of autumn time. Maximum award £5,000, but yeah, could be nice. And again, they're very, very flexible in terms of kind of the costs that they will support. So anything, volunteer training expenses there. Actually, a bit more, bit more sort of open about sort of supporting staff salaries and staff training. So real good sort of mix in terms of kind of the costs that they may support. So one to watch definitely for the autumn for anybody looking to set something up in Nottinghamshire, not the city. And then finally, JN Derbyshire Foundation. Now this is a nice little fund. Don't be confused by the Derbyshire mention. Oh, I can see a hand up. So before I move on,
yes, it's just
is that a question?
Yeah. Luke, do you have a question for Edwina?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just looking back at those and comparing those to the other funds, then Edwina, is so covering sort of staff salaries within that funding bid. Is that something the other two wouldn't?
Yeah, the Sport England in particular can be a bit funny about staff salaries. So they will fund sort of like project costs that are costs that are directly related to the project. So if it was a short-term post to deliver that activity, or coaching costs, that sort of thing, they will fund. But if they think it's sort of plugging a gap in terms of a salary cost going forward, they try and unpick that a bit. So they can be a little bit harsh, and I've just seen it actually with a bid that's come back to me. So I supported it, nothing to do with walking, another project within the city that's been successful with the small grants programme, but they've Sport England stripped out some of the salary costs because they've kind of they don't want to fund that. They're wanting to fund sort of direct costs in terms of, so they're funding some staff costs, but that's linked to direct delivery. So they can be a little bit harsh, Sport England, but so sometimes they'll fund it, and in this example, they strip out costs if they like the project, but they don't particularly like a cost.
Okay, thanks, Edwina. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, JN Derbyshire Foundation. So for registered organisations, so not your sort of unregistered community groups, and also not statutory organisations, etc. So possibly one, if there's anybody on the call that's registered as a charity or a CIC or a CIO, might be one to look at. Deadline August, as I say, don't be confused by the Derbyshire reference. It actually covers Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, so it's very specific to the county. Again, grants up to £10,000, but yeah, deadline August. I think they open this up every 6 months. So if you miss this deadline, I think they do open it up in another 6 months, but that's quite a long time to wait. So those are kind of my sort of top ones in terms of small programs, grant programs to look at. Part of my role is really to make sure that I'm picking up as many of kind of the new and existing funding opportunities, anything that's changing, etc. And so we have a funding news section on our website, so I update that as often as I can. So that's got a lot of content going on to that. But if you don't want to miss out on kind of new key funding opportunities, we do a funding newsletter. So if you want to subscribe to that, just let us know. Just send us your email address and we can get you subscribed to that. And that will sort of have any new announcements. So as soon as I hear anything about the Sport England small grants, any changes regarding that, it will be in the funding newsletter. So yeah, just let us know if you want to subscribe to that. And that's it, really. Any questions, just fire away.
And just to add to what you've said, Edwina, we've received your funding newsletter for years and it's really helpful. So if anybody is just keeping an eye out on what's coming up and what's soon to close, and those, especially with walking, to kind of being able to identify funding sources that want to kind of fund that type of physical activity, the newsletter is really helpful. And there's generally lots of time for the run up to be able to see the clear end dates and things like that as well. So I definitely encourage anybody that is interested in looking at kind of funding and funding opportunities to sign up to that. Murad, I think we have a question from you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Edwina. That was really, really helpful. And there's sort of like a bit of a broad church of how you can get involved in it. And I think for me, it was just two questions popped up, which are probably I hope they make sense. But one is like, can you apply as an organization for different grants from the same funding body for different projects at the same time, or do you know the restriction? I mean, it's probably obvious because it'll say on their page, but I'm just wondering what the things are on that.
Yeah, different funders can be different. Sport England used to be really strict about that and say no, one bid. Now I'm pretty sure that they've opened that up, that you can bid more than once to the pot, but to be honest, I probably need to double check that, because I think they keep changing it. So I think currently their stance is that you can apply more than once. Awards for All, again, used to be that you could, so they were a bit different to Sport England. So Sport England said no and Awards for All said yes, and now Sport England is saying yes, and I think Awards for All still say yes. But let me just double check that, because they certainly with Sport England they've changed that. But I can double check that and make sure that I am telling you the correct information and get that back to you.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, because it just sounds like, obviously, if they're trying to share it out, you probably would only get one project. But I guess that it is possible, if you've got, if you understand how to apply really, really well, you might get a second grant for something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, it was quite interesting. It was like, I think in one of the slides you were saying that it could pay for stuff, like and I was just thinking, oh, I wonder if you could actually just buy a few benches and stick them in the park. But then I thought to myself, no, you probably wouldn't be allowed to do that because of the council. So I think there's obviously involvement on with different organizations in something like that. So, yeah.
Yes, correct. So in terms of Sport England, if you're doing some capital improvements, they like to see the applicant being either the owner or the leaseholder of the land that's being improved. So yeah, in that case, it probably would need to come from the local authority. And then they start asking, because it's such a big organisation as a local authority, why is the local authority sort of wanting that? So I think where you've got that community involvement, sort of saying, actually, this is, sort of working with the community and the community organisations, that might sort of strengthen that case in terms of saying, this is a community, sort of the community are demanding this. So that's where that joined up working would help.
Right, yeah. And the third thing was like the walking boots. I was thinking, blooming heck, that sounds like that's quite a professional outfit, isn't it? If you've got walking boots, I mean, it's like it's not your regular neighbourhood walk, is it, that?
Yeah.
So it's quite
but cool. Yeah, it's just a good example in terms of the kits. There's some people that just might need that kit. The Sport England's they don't like to do that unless it's owned by the group.
I know sometimes in some of the communities that we've delivered projects in, access to kind of waterproofs and things that enable year-round walking has been something that has been seen as a barrier in some communities. So yeah. Edwina, that's really helpful. I've been rapidly scribbling down dates as well, because I think one of the things as well when we're thinking about walking is that very often the delivery is very confined to a very specific area. It's kind of almost niche in terms of that community high level of engagement, and finding funders that want to support that is a real art. So hopefully that might provide some oversight for other attendees as well. I'm thinking, like Catherine, with your British Nordic Walking, there might be some funds there that potentially might want to champion extensions of those pilot projects where you can see really good stuff happening. And likewise with some of the other projects we've talked about as well, they may just be that little kind of open door that enables us to expand the rollout of things that we know are going to work really well and gain good traction. So thank you. Fabulous. I will move on then to the next agenda item, if I can, which is a very...
Sorry, Helen. Yeah, this is my technical. Oh yeah, stop sharing. I can see my stop sharing. So I was panicking because I didn't have to stop sharing. So I'll stop sharing now.
That's okay,
Sorry.
Edwina. It's my time now to fumble with the with the technology. I think I should be sharing my screen with you, hopefully. Oh dear, everything's gone. Everything's stopped. Let's see.
I think we've lost your camera as well, Helen.
Yeah, actually, I've lost everything. So I'm hoping that you can still see me. It just looks like it's frozen at the moment.
You're back. We can see your calendar though. There we go.
So here we go. Okay, so moving on then to our last discussion point, which is a very brief conversation really about co-design. And actually it's really useful because it's been sort of talked about throughout these different agenda items. Edwina has mentioned it. We mentioned it when we were talking about projects that are working really well. So I think we're going to have just a very quick overview of co-design and co-production. And Jade, are you okay to briefly talk about that? And then I've also put together some examples of really what I think are really innovative best practice. So we'll go quickly through kind of Jade's, your bit, if that's okay, and then look at these examples.
Absolutely fine to go quickly through. If I can steal the screen back though, Helen.
You can indeed.
I almost said that as you're frozen. And I guess kind of as Helen mentioned, it feels like there's been a theme of co-production using slightly different language throughout the call this morning. So I'm not going to go into great detail. I will hold my hands up. I am no expert in terms of what I'm about to share. I'm just sharing, I guess, just some initial theory. And part of the reason for that is linking back, obviously, we heard some examples of initiatives earlier around kind of what's working well in communities in terms of kind of, I guess, the outputs and some of that. But really hearing in the last couple of conversations we've been having around walking around the importance of the community engaging right from the outset. So not necessarily kind of just writing that funding bid, but actually trying to do that alongside communities. So just wanted to share a little bit of theory that comes along with this. So just bear with me as I get it up, and then we can get into the real detail from Helen in terms of kind of, hearing in reality, what does this look like, and just talking us through some different examples. So hopefully that is, you can now see that on your screens as a little bit of what's called a co-production ladder. And as I said, kind of some of this really for me is just thinking around that terminology and how we engage communities within the work that we're doing and what we might be able to do to think about that a little bit differently. And I guess the bit I'm really going to concentrate on for kind of a couple of minutes this morning is thinking about the top end of the ladder and really thinking about kind of that transition of doing with communities and how might we be able to take some small steps in the work that we're doing to kind of really get kind of communities and individuals engaged a little bit more in what we're trying to do. So I'm going to jump straight up to kind of just some examples of what these words mean. And as I said, I'm very guilty of interchanging the language that I use when I talk about co-production and co-design and engagement. And they're all slightly different. And just thinking, I guess, for how do we get, or can we get closer to the top of the ladder in terms of what that work looks like? So Just when we think about consultation, and I've certainly heard the word surveys a little bit earlier on in today's conversation, and actually that's a great starting point. If we're not already doing that kind of thinking about how we hear from communities, surveys is a great way to start to do that. So it might be a survey, or it might be a one-off meeting where we kind of consult a group of individuals that we're wanting to connect with and engage, to look and understand how do we do things differently, that might meet their needs, or what might they want to see when we think about walking in their communities, for example. And the difference as we start to think about engagement is the regularity of that conversation. So are we just doing it through a one-off point of contact? Is there a space, and some places, I didn't get to read the detail earlier, but we talked like around coffee mornings, or kind of, is there that regular space where people can come back and connect? And it might be after a walk, for example, that we engage the walkers and hear about what they really enjoyed, what might not they want to do again, or is there anything that they've overcome that they thought they might not, and how might other people be able to be connected and help engaged into that conversation. And then we get to, I guess, kind of what can be seen as the gold stars of the co-production ladder. So really thinking about that, how do we co-design with communities? And in practice, it goes that step further, so from beyond the engagement and that ongoing consultation or conversation, to really think about kind of them designing it, so practically as a community, telling us how they want their walks to happen. Are they choosing the routes that we're going to be doing the following week? Is there something more that they can be doing to really influence and inform how that space, or how a community, for example, if a new footpath is going in, what works for them, and kind of really kind of doing that alongside communities as an ongoing conversation. And the difference between that co-design to co-production is not just the ongoing involvement in the design, but actually the communities delivering that change as well, alongside kind of the services and professionals. So pretty much involved in all of those decisions, not just kind of the design and that conversation. I am going to stop talking there. Hopefully that kind of, these examples and differences have made some sense to you, and they're not just some words that I've been using that make sense to me. So I'm happy to take questions, not that I possibly have many of the answers to them. As I said, I am no expert, but just though in terms of that thinking, as I said, I'm really guilty of talking about co-production when probably what I mean is engagement.
Thanks so much, Jada. And I think the thing is as well is this terminology and the expectation of delivering at a co-design and co-production level is really ramping up, and probably the same feeling for us at Ridewise as other people in the room, that we're being looked at to deliver things in a co-produced way, in co-designed way. But actually that almost seems to have just crept in. And those kind of big changes in mindset maybe haven't quite caught up with what some of the things that we're being asked to deliver. And delivery can take such a long time, can't it, to do something that's genuinely engaging. So that's really helpful. I see that Jane has got her hand up.
Hi, so I'm Jane Houghton, and I'm work with the engagement team within the ICB, the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Integrated Care Board. So we also link in with the integrated care system. So we have a people working with people and community strategy at the moment, which helps to basically what you've just said, to include co-production, co-design, engagement, informing, links with community and voluntary sector to enable better health for our communities. The main focuses at the moment are on long-term conditions, prevention, and from what I've heard today, this sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm totally on board with it. So I'm just wondering whether we're already linked in with Active Partnership Trust as part of our Voluntary Sector Alliance. But I'm just wondering if it would be possible for one of you to come and talk to our team and see if we can make some links and try and do some really good work, prevention work in line with the strategy that we've just released on our website, that I think will help to help our community to look after themselves better. Don't know what you think. If you do, then just give me a quick call.
I think it'd be a great conversation, but Karen's popped her hand up, so she may be best to come in and connect the dots together.
Yes, Jane, that's absolutely music to our ears.
Ah,
and I know we've
good.
been connecting in at sort of different levels, etc., and different members from our team. But can I pick a conversation with you after this?
Absolutely. I'll pop my email in the chat. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I'll do it on behalf of the group, this group as well. I'm part of the strategic group and part of the wider sort of system work that we're doing, obviously with you know, local authorities, etc., and the whole BCSE Alliance and stuff like that.
Yes, great.
Yes. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
That's great. What a result they have to connect that together. That's brilliant. What I'm going to do then is taking Jade's example. Or Jade's overview of that co-design. What we've been doing over the last 6 to 7 weeks is looking to find really good examples of best practice in walking. As we know from the previous conversations that we've had in this group, kind of sharing those best practices is just really useful. It can help us to jumpstart and to kind of miss out some of the really difficult elements in the middle where other people have already gone through that and they've already experienced it and they've got really good processes that have worked and have proven to work. We've found 6 to 8-ish really nice, unique examples of effective walking programs that have been delivered. Now, they're not all local to us, but they've got some commonalities in them. So I haven't kind of, some of these are really large, and I think probably what we might do is look to see whether we can upload them online so that you can have a look at these. But I just wanted to flag them up really as different ways of working, and especially because it's so focused on walking. So there's 3 that I'm just showing on this, and the documents were so large that I've only been able to do a brief screen grab, but we'll find a way of sharing them with you. And I wanted to flag them up. So I'll just very briefly talk you through each of them. The first one I've included because it's so unique, and it's a combination, a collection of case studies about how increased walking and cycling interventions have reduced crime and antisocial behaviour. And it's just really interesting that they've got this such a close link, it's a very academic study, but it really is showing how that co-design, and that's really the crux of this. That they've gone into communities and with the people that live in those neighbourhoods, they've created programs that not only have delivered health benefits, but they've also reduced crime and they've also improved the environmental geography of where people are living. So I just thought that was really unique. There's some very academic language in this study, but it boils down to kind of 3 really key things, and this links in with that co-production and co-design. The authors call it territorial reinforcement, but basically it's that feeling that the space you're walking in is your space. And so what they did was they went out with communities, they engaged with them, they found out a little bit like the fear of dog walking, of dogs when people are walking. They found out that people didn't want to walk in their areas, they didn't feel comfortable, they didn't feel safe. And they did all sorts of projects in the run-up to walking interventions to help people to engage in their communities. So things like seed bombing, instead of their local authorities planting wildflowers in the verges, the community went out and they seed bombed, and they tended for and cared for their spaces, and that built up a sense of ownership. And it's quite an interesting study of it really, but yeah, so we'll pop that online. The second one is Living Streets, who you'll all be really, really familiar with. But what was unique about theirs, I think, was that they engaged their community in undertaking community reviews of the streets. So that's not about transport planners going out there and kind of walking the pavements. It's about members of that community and residents walking around and making notes about what they feel about the spaces that they're walking in and what barriers that presents. They very much work around small collections of residents that support their areas. And really kind of nice about this as well is that they had lots of examples where those communities were then given the funds directly to be able to support small scale walking activities. So it wasn't about local authorities holding a little pot and then shuffling it across for, I don't know, water bottles or high vis. It was about trusting and embedding that activity in the community, giving them a small pot to be able to work with, and then letting them deliver it in a way that works really well. So I thought that was kind of just a different approach to it. And then with the last one, the green walking, I've included this because green social prescribing, it's just becoming such a hot topic, and walking really is right up there at the top of it. And this one is a really nice case study around how this local authority, Kenton Medway, engaged with their communities to come out with something that's really quite unique. So they had walking groups, but they delivered them along the lines of being out and being in the environment. And walking was really just seen as a catalyst to get people out. So they did things with the engagement and the design of the community. Their walkers were given tape measures, for example. And when they go out walking, they measure trees, they measure the width of them, they keep that information, they start to understand their natural environment, and they measure the height of wildflower meadows and all sorts of different things. That's really unique. You'd probably never think of giving your walkers tape measures if you were to just sit down with a blank piece of paper, but because it was designed together, it came out as something that's, yeah, really quite unique. So they're just a couple that I wanted to flag up, really, because I think it's really helpful to be able to see what is working in other areas. And we'll find a way of sharing those with you as well, because there's quite a few other examples where you can see that co-production and co-design has led to something that is more innovative and more community focused, and probably works in that community. If you were to try and move it to somebody else's community, it would need something completely different. But for them, it works perfectly. So we'll find a way of sharing those with you. We've got about 12 of them overall, a little bit too large to pop on an email, but we'll maybe upload them onto the website and let you see them and go through them at your leisure. Jade, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about to wrap that up, or does that kind of cover that element of it? Does anybody have any questions at all about any of that? I know it's a real whistle-stop tour. No. Okie dokie. Okay, we'll include it in the notes then where we put that so that you can access those information. But I think the growing kind of depth of case studies and best practice around walking is really encouraging, because for a long time there's not been a great deal other than numbers and stats and some health benefit questionnaires and things. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up then with just a quick question about, oh, sorry, Jade, I see your hand is up.
Apologies, my internet's cutting out, so I half heard my name, so apologies if I've missed a question, but hopefully while I've got you, just on that case studies and stories, Helen, Adam had put a comment earlier in the chat about if there's stories that's useful to capture across Nottinghamshire, then please connect in with Adam. As I said, he's popped his details and a link to do that. So I will stop interrupting and Adam's put his hand up now.
Yeah, I didn't put my details, but I will. So I just added it in there. Yeah, I'll send them. But I do the meeting invite, so everyone has my email. So it's that one.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, we'll wrap up then. If anybody has any questions, now is the time to either pop them in the chat or to put your hands up. I really hope that helped to kind of move the conversation forward from where we met last time, where we were just exploring what we might want to discuss in this forum. So hopefully it's given you some kind of inspiration, shared a bit of best practice, but also I think that kind of really practical element of where do we get the funding from and who can we apply for and who's going to support us in this type of delivery from Edwina is really helpful. So I hope that you found the same thing too. With that, then we will wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time, for your engagement, and for all the information that we've shared. We'll pop some stuff out on notes. We'll put some links out there as well. And also there's a suggestion that potentially some people within this group might want to share emails and to share contacts so that you can pick up when we go out with the notes. We'll do a little bit of a request. So if you're happy for us to share your email address, then please do let us know, because we would love to be able to join you up so that you can take some of those conversations further than this meeting. And with that, we'll leave it. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thanks for your input. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Helen. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.